Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I have read in the last week. And yeah, let's just go ahead and get straight into it. The first book that I finished is What You Are Looking For is in the Library. This is by Michiko Aoyama. And this was a really charming, cozy collection of interconnected stories that talk about the characters' different ages and stages in life. I overall gave this book a 3-star rating, which means to me it was just okay. It was good, but it wasn't great, and it definitely wasn't something that I loved. I have to admit, I was actually a little disappointed in this book. I picked up this book because I was hoping it was going to be like the book before the coffee gets cold, not in terms of plot, but just in terms of feel. And I do think in terms of feel, it was that. However, I just was disappointed in the writing style. I thought at times the writing style was a bit too simplistic, and at other times it just came across oddly, which my guess is has to do with the translation of the work. And so I was disappointed by how clunky at times the writing became and just awkward, which I can't imagine being a translator, so I don't know that I like blame anyone for this, but it was something that was distracting enough that it kept it from being a better read for me. That said, I did really enjoy each of these stories. I thought the plot and the structure of the novel overall was really good and super surprising. Going into this book, I did not realize it was going to be interconnected stories. So I enjoyed that part. I liked the sort of mysterious element of the librarian and people going to her to seek advice, though that does remind me of one other element in the book that I really did not like, and that was the massive amounts of fat shaming. The librarian herself is really large, apparently, but they couldn't leave it at that. She was compared to the Stave Puff Marshmallow Man, to Baymax, and a whole host of other really insulting and offensive manners. Like, I don't think they compared her to a whale. Oh no, she was compared to a giant panda. And there's a picture of her in the book because there are really nice sketches in the book. And I just don't feel like those were fair comparisons, and even if they were, it was just an unnecessary thing, and every single character that ran into her had to come up with some cheeky comparison to some super large thing that they thought she was like. I really did not like that. I thought it was unnecessary, really kind of a turnoff. So if that is something that you do not like in your books, I would not recommend this book because you're going to hit it in every single story from the beginning of the book all the way to the end. Now, I will say in its defense that the characters do kind of come around to her and do even sort of realize like how unfair they're being by characterizing her by her weight, but it is their first impression and they all feel the need to comment on it. Not necessarily to her, but certainly in their minds, and that's the perspective that we're getting. The other thing that I didn't like about the writing style was that even though every chapter is a different character, I felt like all the characters sounded the same, it's just their lives were different. So it almost felt like 5 or 6 different personalities all in the same one person, but even then, I feel like somebody with split personalities actually has more variation between their personalities. So, I guess at the end of the day, other than the structure and the concept of the book, there wasn't a lot that I liked in this. Now I'm kind of questioning how I still gave it a 3, but I didn't dislike the book. There were just a lot of things in it that I didn't like, but it did get outweighed by some of the cozy factors. So it's complicated. This book I would recommend to people who like themes of hope and growth and self discovery because there is a lot of that, including book list in this book. I would also recommend it to people who like cozy and inspiring works and who like books that reflect on life and on the lives of different people. However, like I said, if you don't like some of the other things that I mentioned in it, this might be one that you might choose to skip. I think there are other, cozy Japanese fiction novels out there and other cozy novels out there in general that do a better job with that feel, even if it's not necessarily the same topic or the way in which those topics are approached. The next book I have to discuss is Logan's Run. This is by William F. Nolan and George Clayton Johnson. And this is a book that takes place in 2116. So, yes, it is a sci fi novel. And the main character is Logan himself. And he lives in a world where it is illegal to be over 21. When the red palm flower in your hand starts blinking red and black, that means it is your last day and you have 24 hours left to live before you're supposed to turn yourself in for the deep sleep, which, if you haven't figured it out, isn't actually sleep. It's the sleep of death. And for Logan, who has lived his entire adult life, which, if you haven't caught on, being an adult is from about 16 to 21. But for Logan, he has lived his entire adult life as an enforcer, or what they call a sandman, where his job is to hunt down people who have decided to run instead of turn themselves in. But when his palm starts to blink, he suddenly finds himself with a difficult choice of trying to decide whether to turn himself in or to go on the run like all the people he has spent his life hunting down. I gave this book a 4 star, and I think the main thing that kept it from being a 5 star for me was there are a couple of moments in the writing that were a little unnecessarily confusing, given that this was a pretty easy read overall. So the moments where it was like, wait, what is this saying? Really weren't confusing, difficult to understand scientific moments, but they were typically just poorly written moments in the book. The other thing that kept this from being a 5 star for me was it does have a lot of the what I consider to be classic sci-fi over sexualization of everything and sometimes everyone. Some of that fits in with the book because one of the consequences of sort of the system of no one being able to live past 21 is that everything in life has to happen earlier, including, intimacy in relationships with other partners and that kind of thing. And that part is intentional, but then there's also just a lot of gratuitous nakedness that I was kind of like, why is that in there? There's definitely some odd moments. That said, overall, this was a very quick, fun read and well paced, and I enjoyed all of the action in it. If you like books where you're just running from one place to another and trying to survive and escape, then this may be the book for you. I would also recommend this book to people who liked the premise and the idea and some of the complications that came in the book. They both die at the end. This to me reminded me of a very similar premise of ideas and issues that get discussed in there in terms of youth and rebellion and just that struggle to survive. However, I feel like it's a much faster pace than that book was because there is much more at stake in this book. I would also recommend this book to anyone who likes dystopians and or books about utopias and all the themes that come up in those. That brings me to the books that I am currently reading. And the first book that I have is Jamaica Inn by Daphne DuMaurier. I recently showed this book in a book haul, and it was one of the books that people most frequently commented on as being a book that they would recommend I read. I did read it. Well, I say that as if I finished it. I haven't. I'm only 30 pages in, but I am enjoying it so far. This is by the same author as the well known classic Rebecca, and it is about Mary Yellen, who has newly been orphaned. She has just journeyed to the deserted moorlands of Cornwall to live with her aunt and uncle at their inn, the Jamaica Inn or Jamaica Inn. However, upon arriving there, she is learning that life with family can be just as scary and isolating as living by yourself. This book I am finding is just as atmospheric as Rebecca is and has a really great narration, but it's also very different from Rebecca. I would say the atmosphere is slightly different than you have in Rebecca, though definitely still leaning towards the side of Gothic. There's definitely um, I feel like more associations for me with Jane Eyre than there are straight with Rebecca. I would say one of the biggest differences for me that I'm noticing right off the bat is that the narrator is very different, but I don't think that's a bad thing to me. In my mind, that makes it feel distinctly different from Rebecca, and I like that when an author is able to do that. While this book already has me intrigued by the characters and the mysteries, 30 pages in, I am finding that I'm still not quite caught up by this book. And so I'll be interested to see if it hooks me as well, if not as early as Rebecca did. I am also listening to Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe on audiobook. And this book is about the lifetimes and struggles of Moll Flanders, and I'll get to why I question that. She certainly is telling you about your struggles. I just think it's questionable whether or not she's actually struggling. And she is a female who is basically trying to navigate life on her own as a female in 18th century England. No mean feat for sure. So, my initial thoughts on this book are one, I'm really enjoying the narrative voice. I think that is one of the strongest suits about this novel is Daniel Defoe really has captured an amazing and extremely strong character voice in here. This book is told in the first person, of course. And I say, of course, because if you know 18th century fiction, you know that the vast majority of fiction, if not all fiction at that time, was written in the first person in England because basically the idea of a fiction novel really hadn't settled. And so people didn't understand the concept of telling a pretend story. And so what a lot of authors had to do was they had to write novels and fiction and have it in some way come across as possibly being a true story. So thus first person narration was almost a must. The other things that I could say about Moll as a narrator is that she's questionable in her reliability at this point. I am about almost maybe halfway in the audiobook, and she is sharing a lot of outrageous and, at least according to her, unavoidable circumstances that she's come across. And yeah, I haven't quite decided yet, even though this is a reread for me, whether or not I believe her. And that's saying a lot that I'm 100 pages in and I still can't decide whether her life is really as difficult as she's claiming it is. Because I don't know. I feel like I would have managed to avoid a lot of the circumstances that she's in. That said, you do have to think about whether or not she truly could have avoided her situations or if they really are circumstances that society is forcing her into. So we'll see, but so far, so good. And my last 2 books that I am currently reading are just 2 books that I am still in the midst of and have been carrying on with, and at least one of them will be carrying on with for a while. So the first one I will discuss is The Mysteries of Paris by Eugene Sue, and I realized I don't think I've ever really summarized what I think this book is about. I would say that this is a story that predominantly follows a handful of characters that come across one another one night in a alley in the seedy part of Paris. And what ensues is sort of the intersections of their lives as they continue on and as they uncover and rediscover and try to come to the conclusions on some of the mysteries of Paris. Thus far, I have just finished book 3, which is great. So I am on schedule for my buddy read. We will be reading book 4 in June, and I am looking forward to that because this book in here, and it's divided into, I think, 11 different books because it was serialized as it was published. But book 3 kind of ends on a very heavy note where we just finished hearing about a very poor family in Paris. And that is definitely one of the things I appreciate about Eugene Sue is that he does take time in this book to really make his readers think about life in Paris and the different people that they would come across. And he is very aware in his writing of who his audience is, which is definitely upper class Parisians. And the final book I am in the middle of is The Arabian Nights. I have been talking about this for going on 3 months now, and in some, I think this is another book I also haven't really talked about what it's about. I think I've just assumed that everybody knows. But again, in brief, this is a series of stories. The overarching one is about a woman named Shahrazad who finds herself captured by the local king, who is known for his bloody beheading of women after sharing one night with them. And what ensues is her attempt to tell engaging and suspenseful stories night after night in the hopes of keeping herself alive. I would definitely say that these stories include the like original cliffhangers. Like, did that book plot idea originate here? I don't know, but it seems like it. So, the most exciting thing for me with this book this week is I'm pretty sure I have found the story in here that is my new favorite, or probably like my most favorite, I would even say. And that would be the story of King Shahraman. And it is about 140 pages long with a slew of embedded narratives and little stories, long and short, thrown within that one story, tangential stories to the titular character, so on and so forth. And I have enjoyed every single one of them. It has so many twists and turns and just odd things happening in it. Anyway, that particular story with King Shahraman, I think started out good, was great in the middle. I enjoyed all the embedded narratives, like I said, and then the end was just so ridiculous, but fascinating and fun that I couldn't help but love it as a whole. I still have just a little bit left. Look how close I am. And there's notes at the end of this, so I'm way closer than it seems. I have about just 100 pages left. So this book will be finished in May, even though I will still be talking about it into June. So that is it for my first wrap up for June. I am still in the midst of these books. Well, technically, I'm finished with this one, but I'll keep telling you about it until I've gotten to the end. And I've started some really good ones that I'm really interested in, and I finished two. And I really had a good time reading this week. So I'm really happy with the first two books that I've finished off my TBR. And yeah, I hope to make some good progress and hopefully be finished with Jamaica and in Moll Flanders by my next check in and to start the next book on that list. One of the things that I do want to mention about the list of books that I've created for this month is that I have decided to read them more or less so from short to long, partially because I want to get through as many of them as possible. And if I end on one of the longer books, that's fine. I will just bring it with me on my move. But, yeah, I'm looking at it right here over on my floor, and, I'm excited about the books that are over there, so I really hope I can make it through some of these today and get going. I have a glowing background now because when I started recording at first thing this morning, it was super gloomy outside and looked like it was gonna rain, and I guess it didn't, so there we go. Alright, that's it for now. Let me know what you are reading this week and, what your plans are for June, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.